things that really stuck with me was the evaluation. And listen, companies can move fast, things are moving, you're growing, right? But to take that time to be really intentional and be disciplined on that evaluation, I think what kind of impact does that? I mean, you talked about it here, but I just want to enforce that a little bit. And it seems like the key ingredient to the secret sauce here
is that every week we have a town hall meeting, half hour, no longer, quick update on the business, recognizing some performance. And then we also give each one of our team members a chance to recommend someone that lived by the core values of Willory. And it's a great way of recognizing people. They certainly appreciate it. We get 3 or 4 or 5 of those every single week, it seems like. And it just puts smiles on people's faces. And I get told all the time, many of the people that work for us have worked for much larger, more sophisticated companies. And they will tell me, John, I've never been more recognized for what I do and the work that I have. I never felt more appreciated. And I also know exactly where I stand.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Sliman.
All right. Welcome back to Unfinished Business, everybody. Hope everybody's doing great out there. Listen, I'm joined by John Bernatovicz. This guy is a business leader, entrepreneur, fantastic keynote speaker, author of a book called HR Like a Boss, and the founder of Willory, that's really become one of the most trusted HR, payroll, recruiting, consulting, and technology solutions really that's out there today. So we're going to dive in to John's journey in building business, supporting HR professionals across the country. But more importantly, we're going to talk about companies and how they can better align with people, the strategies, business goals, the future of HR tech, and really what it means to lead like a boss. Plus, we'll explore his inspiration behind his book, which we'll dive into a little bit. And listen, if you're a business owner and you're building an organization, businesses are constantly evolving, and you want insight to take care of really the most valuable assets, which are your people, then you're going to want to listen to this show. So without further ado, John, I want to thank you for being here. Excited to get into this conversation.
How much time do we have, David? I promise to do all that in 30 minutes or less. That way we don't lose people's attention. How's that? Is that fair enough?
We'll keep a pace to it, man. But listen, us connecting, we have some mutual friends that introduced us, and I know one of your best friends was a guy that I go way back with, and again, I want to thank you for being here. We'll rip through it, but I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Thank you for having me, and it is amazing how these random connections you make back in the day, 30, 40 years later, turn into a lot of bro hugs, a lot of tears, a lot more laughs, and the chance to make incredible new connections. And who knows where our relationship's going to go after podcasting. That's definitely an intimate experience for the two of us. And hopefully the most important people listening out there glean a thing or two from our exchange. That's my goal.
Yeah, that's the goal of the show and us getting together. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well said. Great intro, my friend. Thank you. So John, listen, take us back to the beginning. What inspired you in your journey to HR, payroll services, and really led you to launching Willory?
Sure. Well, I wanted a job first and foremost, David. I'll start there. When I was graduating from college, I was fortunate enough to have the option of potentially being a professional golfer, and I was wise to not make that choice. not because it wouldn't have been really cool, but there were just so many good players, and I was on the fringe. I don't know, probably sort of kind of maybe could have done it for a hot minute, but I didn't want to waste a lot of people's money and investing in something that was so fragile. Golf is a very unique and difficult game. But anyway, in my spring of my senior year, I met a young man who was recruiting for a company called ADP. And I ended up landing an outside sales rep job with them, had success in a short term, just pure will, working my tail off and trying to figure out what life was like as a working professional. And I spent 10 years working at ADP, and as a result, grew an affinity for the HR and payroll community. and decided to leave there. I actually started a side hustle before it was a side hustle while working at corporate America. My boss knew about it, which made it even better because he had his own side hustle. And that entrepreneurial itch, that bite, that experience while I was working at corporate America was just too attractive for me to not try that full time. I decided to leave corporate America and joined a boutique search firm where we did executive search. And then in the midst of that 4-year period from having left corporate America and to me starting what is now Willory, my wife and I had our 2 kids, Will and Mallory. And if you're a parent or if you're listening and have anything that you love a lot, whether it be kids or a favorite animal or whatever the case might be, that kind of changes your perspective a little bit.
Yes.
And I wanted to create a legacy for my kids. And as a result, I founded Willory, which is named after Will and Mallory. I merged those 2 things together. That's one of the unique things that came out of getting no sleep. I came up with the name of a company, which is pretty ironic, holding my son while my daughter was born. I'm thinking to myself, Will and Mallory, merge them together. Oh my gosh, there's the name of my company. And it's just worked out fabulously well. It's a unique story because we found the firm based upon family characteristics and core values. We treat our team members like their family. We really, truly do that. We just don't say it. And we've been recognized as one of the top employers in our community for talent, high performing talent, year over year, which is a great accolade for us. And as a result of those experiences and taking that risk, we have been focused in the last 15 years on empowering people. And we do that through 4 core services that are focused on people, on HR technology, on selection of new systems, and on business transformation.
That's great. Now, what are the core values that have really shaped your leadership style? Especially, I mean, how many people do you have with your organization right now? I'm sure it's grown through the years, but what are some of those things that have carried over and really been impactful, or that you could recommend for an entrepreneur or someone who's even thinking about getting into business, but an entrepreneur who's looking to build a stronger culture?
Sure. Well, you mentioned the fact that I wrote a book, and one of the unique things about writing a book is that you get a chance to write down all the really bad ideas you have and are forced to read them back. And when you read them back, you do not include them in your book, but every once in a while there's a nugget where you read it and you're like, that's not a bad idea. And then you realize you're the author and you have to look around when you made that outward statement of, wait, how arrogant am I that I just said my own idea was a good idea? But anyway, one of the good ideas that we had at Willory was being very clear about our firm's purpose. And it's a distinguishing term. It's not your mission. We do have a mission in our firm, but our purpose is we empower people. I view a purpose as being aspirational, likely something you'll never do to full totality. We're not going to empower every single person, but we're going to try our damnedest to do so. And we think human resources and internal payroll operation functions have an ability to make a difference in people's lives, even though they're oftentimes underappreciated, undervalued, under-resourced. And as a result of that, we have a clear purpose of empowering people. And then we have 5 core values. And I won't go into describing what those 5 core values are, but they have a lot to do with accountability and integrity and enthusiasm and whatnot. But I think the big differentiator that we learned through some business school and some general business strategy advice of making those core values very clear, define them, use them in your hiring and in your recruiting strategy and activities. Make sure that you create accountability and recognition to them in the midst of an employee's tenure at your company. Yeah. And then when they leave your organization, figure out where they align to those values or not. And as a result, we end up having a quarterly conversation with every one of our team members about how do you view yourself around our core values and how does your direct supervisor view that? And if there's any sort of gap between those two, we want those individuals to have dialogue about it, because the saying that you get hired for skill and fired for fit, I think the Luka Doncic trade of the 2025-24 NBA season, everybody was like scratching their head. Why would you trade such a talent? Well, the GM may get fired from the Dallas Mavs, but he's going to sit there and tell you it wasn't a cultural fit for what we were looking to do long-term, and talk about top 3 player in the NBA. And we study that. We are very steadfast about it. And the other really cool thing besides those quarterly check-ins that we do, David, is that every week we have a town hall meeting, half hour, no longer, quick update on the business, recognizing some performance. And then we also give each one of our team members a chance to recommend someone that lived by the core values of Willory. And it's a great way of recognizing people. They certainly appreciate it. We get 3 or 4 or 5 of those every single week, it seems like. And it just puts smiles on people's faces. And I get told all the time, many of the people that work for us have worked for much larger, more sophisticated companies. And they will tell me, John, I've never been more recognized for what I do and the work that I have. I never felt more appreciated. And I also know exactly where I stand, which sometimes poor management, lack of clarity, whatever the reason is, can create that. So to recap quickly, have a clearly defined purpose, your aspirational why, define those core values, hold people accountable to them, and more importantly, recognize them when they achieve that.
Yeah, I think there's some, and listen, play that back, everybody. If you're building an organization, just that whole explanation based on my question, but you've heard the word core values. You have to identify those. And I think too many times, John, and I'm sure you've seen this, I would say most, but there's organizations out there, the ones that struggle are the ones who don't define that. And then the second thing that you said there's great stuff out of that, but things that really stuck with me was the evaluation. And listen, companies can move fast. Things are moving, you're growing, right? But to take that time to be really intentional and be disciplined on that evaluation, I think what kind of impact does that? I mean, you talked about it here, but I just want to enforce that a little bit. And it seems like the key ingredient to the secret sauce here.
I'll tell you this, here's the impact of it. And as the owner, you just kind of sit back and observe and think, well, gosh, I never thought this was going to happen. We have some very tenured, highly skilled people that work at our firm. We're very blessed to have them, very blessed. I sometimes scratch my head, why did they join us? Why did they stay? And we do one really cool thing in addition to what I shared, David, is that every quarter we recognize the employee that gets recommended the most or has the most, I'll call it fever around the core values for that particular quarter. And 3 quarters in a row, we had people, if I add up their years of experience, have roughly 80 years of experience amongst those 3 people. When they were recognized, they were shocked. Like we surprised them in front of our whole team. They were shocked by the recognition, and then they started to cry. Grown people crying at work in front of their peers about what that means to them. And one of them in particular, honest to God, said to me, "I have never felt this way at work in my life, ever." And to me, it's simple. It costs no money, which oftentimes we think of ways how I can't do that because it costs us money. Well, being kind and recognizing people doesn't cost you anything. Now you have to train your managers and directors and your supervisors on how to do that.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think it does, David, that is really transformational is that when you have to have a difficult conversation, you build up that wealth or that you made enough deposits in that relationship to be like, hey, I know you've been doing a great job, but here's something I want to talk with you about, a way for you to improve or that we don't think aligns. And it just seems to land way more effectively than when you're just always sitting there saying, hey, you didn't do a good job of this, or you're way behind on this, or
right.
This didn't really work out the way that we expected it to.
Yeah, or even any quick email that you say, hey, you did a good job. I mean, that still doesn't have the impact of what you're talking about here. And that's just the formal recognition. Everybody loves to be recognized, but again, when it's warranted as well. That's the key to this. And that's what you said earlier, is you got to have a great management team and leadership team to identify it and really buy into those values. But again, comes back to those core values and understanding that. Listen, you work closely with both HR professionals, financial decision makers, probably CFO, controllers, all that good stuff. What are some of the things that you see right now that are most common to make an impact on an organization that can help them really solidify or empower the people they have?
Sure. I think first and foremost is having, and we talked about this a little bit, just a clear definition of who you are as an organization, what your strategy is, what do you stand for. Make that consistent amongst your leadership team, amongst your supervisors, amongst your employees, and then that can cascade out in the marketplace. When you have two different stories of what your internal employees think versus what the outside market believes, and customer base or partners or ecosystem vendors, that's problematic. That's one of those things where owners, CEOs, shareholders have a hard time going to bed or sleeping at night because they know that what they're selling isn't necessarily represented in the actual delivery, or your employees think differently of you than your customers do. That's a bad equation.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that alignment and clarity is really important. I think another critical aspect is you have to have effective leadership. You have to have effective leadership, aligned managers, directors, supervisors that understand what I just described before. They're trained and skilled to be able to handle unique things that happen with employees. And they also have a great eye for talent, and they know how to inspire and motivate people. I think those are just such underappreciated skills. We talk all the time. I've mentioned sports already once or twice. Sorry for that, but
No, please.
there's great coaches and bad coaches. And great coaches find a way to get the most out of their players and their teams, and bad coaches find a way to get the least amount of great players or mediocre players. And we just assume managers know what they're doing. Please do not make that assumption. Please do not make that assumption. That will get you in trouble. And the last thing I will recommend, and this is something we love to do at our firm, I shouldn't say love, but it's been a great exercise. It's the emphatic rehire conversation. We go through a roster every 6 to 12 months with our full team, including myself, and say, would we emphatically rehire David and Steve and Joe and Sally and Jane? And if we say yes, then what opportunities could we provide? Why would we emphatically rehire them? Where did we find them? And how do we provide them with more opportunities? The ones that we say no to, we evaluate and say, okay, why are we here? What have we done as a firm to not allow David to be successful in his role? And how do we change that? And then once we decide, are we going to coach them up? Or are we going to coach them out? Are they such a bad fit? They're just not performing. Is it best for us to coach them out of the organization? Because what ends up happening is that people that are good want to be surrounded by other good team members.
Yeah.
And the one bad apple can spoil the bunch. There's a reason why that phrase stands true still to this day. And I think it is so emphatic for us to be able to clearly identify high performers and the ones that aren't, to be graceful in our way of supporting them to develop their skills or fit for the organization or find their way out of the company.
Yeah, you've said some great stuff here. And here's one thing, if you listen back to what John just said, the first thing he said was putting responsibility on his organization and why they feel they haven't elevated this professional if they're not moving in the right direction. And I think too many times organizations want to point the fingers at that person, and they don't really want to understand where they can improve. And then if you've taken those steps and somebody's not working out, then you have to take it to the next level. And it's funny, I mean, sports analogy, it's fun. Nick Saban said this one, mediocre people don't like working with high performers, and high performers don't like working with mediocre people. So it just doesn't work out in that case. And I thought that was pretty powerful. So, all right, let's flip it now. Let's talk talent acquisition, okay, and HR and payroll. What are some things that companies can do, or what are some of the things that they do that are common mistakes, and how do you help correct them when they're looking for talent acquisition? And now, not just you've built the organization in, now you're trying to bring some people from the outside in.
Here's the number one thing I suggest in that sense, and I will diss on HR for a hot minute, or something you might find through ChatGPT, or if you find on the internet. If you're trying to create a job description for a role, let's just say we're first starting off on acquiring talent. You need to hire a controller, or you need to find a head of human resources for your growing company, or you're looking for a sales representative. There's all kinds of options for how you can define what that job is, and some of them are way too long. If you get a job description that is more than 1 page long, I think it's too long.
Okay.
And I sometimes I keep going back to, I used to have a colleague that used to work for me in another business that I own, and we'd have a multitude of issues going on inside of our business. And he would always come back to me and say, John, where do you want my butt to be? I'm like, oh my gosh, why did you say it that way? He goes, well, I only can be one place at a time. What's the most important place you want me to go? And he and I would work through that. And then eventually over time, when I would send him what I would like to get done, I would put them in 1, 2, and 3. And I would occasionally say, this is where I want your butt to be first. And we kind of had some fun with it. That being said, job descriptions can end up having 6, 8, 10, 12 bullet points of things that you're supposed to do in that job. And that doesn't mean that that's not true. But I feel like it is so important for organizations to make the number one part of your job very evident, and what the measurement, tool, resources we're going to provide to be able to allow you to be successful in that job. As a controller, are you properly closing out monthly financials in a timely manner? As a sales professional, are you generating enough leads or pipeline to facilitate the type of expectation you have from your manager or from ownership? That number one thing needs to be clear, needs to be one bullet, needs to be measurable. It needs to be something that you can tell every day, am I doing that well or not? And I literally mean every day. And then the great thing about when you do that is that you can then create a really simple mechanism for training that employee. And back to my point, are you not being successful or not? That's why I put the onus back on our firm, because if someone's not doing well inside of our organization, we cannot point the finger at them first. We have to look, have we created the structure, the environment, the tools, the resources, the clarity, the management to be able to make them a success? And if we can answer yes to that and they're still not successful, then we can go back and look and say, okay, what are they not doing right? Are they a fit for our organization? And how do we address those issues? And ultimately, if you make that job description clear, you're going to differentiate yourself from other employers and other jobs. Yeah. And then when you interview, you can talk specifically about, hey, let's talk about what your experience has been in closing out financial statements in a timely manner. And if they look at you funny and be like, oh, I was always late with my financial statements, and gosh, I was always relying on other people, well, okay, not a great candidate. But if they say, I've had consistency in it, here's my process, here's my structure, you can increase your chances of having success once you make that decision to hire someone.
Yeah, I think it's really the question I love that you're asking here is, give me an example of what you did before and explain it to me. And that's one of the things in building sales organizations that I've trained the managers. Even earlier when I was doing a lot of interviews, I would always ask them, tell me about I'd look at their resume and see the products or the companies they were with. And I'd say, tell me the product that you really love to sell the most. Like, where were you the most successful? And they would tell me. And then I'd say, all right, well, I'll tell you what, so give me a presentation on that. And if they couldn't push that down, then that just told me that maybe the answer was definitely some BS for sure. But yeah, I just applicational interviewing is kind of like what I would call it back when I was doing it. And I think it's a really important thing to make sure someone's a good fit.
Yeah, no doubt. That behavioral-based interviewing, the idea of tell me about a time when, but I think what ends up happening, you're on a job interview and there's so many parts of that role that you're not necessarily clear on trying to understand, can they do all of them well? The answer is probably no. But can they do the most important part of the job well? And the reason that we also do this is, in this day and age where our attention spans are so short, we occasionally get called out of work for personal reasons, or maybe we're setting our lineup for our fantasy football team and we get back to work and then you forget, why am I here? Well, no, let's not forget why you're here. You know what your number one responsibility is. If you need to get back on that work train, let's make sure that you're clear on, focused on closing out the monthly financials timely, or generating the right level of pipeline or leads if you're in a sales role. That's the other reason why we do it.
Yeah, listen, I want to ask you this question, and this is just not personal question, but really how it relates to businesses, because there are situations where you have to hire for somebody. And I've always heard the term, and I've not stuck to it, believe me, hire slow, fire fast kind of thing, right? I mean, I've heard those terms, and I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong. All I'm saying is, when a company is in a position where they need to fill a role, and I feel like that's when companies seem to make decisions that are probably not the best for the organizations. What recommendations can you recommend? What can you make as a recommendation for somebody who's maybe lost somebody, or they need to fill a role, they're growing, whatever have you, and they need to get somebody in there, but you have to have that balance to understand who you're bringing in, but yet you have timeliness that needs where it needs to happen.
I have a very personal response to your personal question.
All right.
If you're out there trying to fall in love and you're trying to force falling in love, maybe you've never done that before, or maybe you know someone that has. You know what that feels like. You just either do or you don't. And I think at times the simple business application to prevent a forced relationship, which can sometimes happen because I have an opening and now I'm going to put a post out on the internet. I'm going to get 100 applicants, many of them not qualified. I'm going to hire one of them because I need someone, is to potentially look at some sort of staff augmentation philosophy, temporary or contracting in that role. There's a lot of positions, HR, payroll, finance, even sales, procurement. There's a temporary, there's a contract resource available for any role. And what that does is it gives you a chance to plug the gap and get the work done that needs to be done while you take your time to fall in love with a candidate, and vice versa. I think all too often when you're hiring and you're like, hey, they're good, they're a butt, their seat can go here, let's rock. And eventually you're going to end up finding that, oh boy, I made a mistake, and you ended up making a bad hire. I would tell you not to force the issue. Find some sort of staff augmentation solution for it. If it's critical work that needs to be done, that way you're not pushed against a wall trying to make a tough decision.
Yeah. And I know it's your specialty, and with so many HR and payroll platforms out there, the plug and play stuff. I mean, there's so many different things out there in the market. What makes you guys different when it comes to consulting and implementation?
The primary aspect, we have a few things that stand out. It's a combination of these things. Number one, we have incredibly skilled and knowledgeable people that are doing the work. Yeah. Secondarily, they're available to our customers through a phone call, a text, or an email. It's not a triage call center. We're not going through a ticketing system. They're available. You then have access to their team and their manager in case that resource isn't available. Then we have incredible domain expertise in the technology that they're on, whether it's ADP or Workday or UKG, Paylocity, Dayforce. Those are just some to name a few that we have domain expertise in. So we understand the system. And then those folks have knowledge, 20, 30, sometimes up to 40 years of experience working in HR or payroll, whether it be benefits, compensation, time and attendance. When you combine that great person, wonderful follow-up, high degree of service, domain expertise, and then they know they've walked a mile in the shoe of the person that they're working for, that combination allows us to be really successful. And quite honestly, we're being compared against these technology companies that have at times way too many customers. They have to find a way to triage calls. It's difficult for them to be so highly engaged with every single customer. And then you have a client contact who's overwhelmed with 9,000 things they have to do. And then, oh gosh, something goes wrong with our system. Now I need to figure out how to make that work right while I've got 16 other things to do. And that our competition is at a disadvantage, where we bring those simplistic layers of great people, accessible, knowledgeable, domain skilled, and understand the functional area. And that is just the foundational part. You add the fact that we got great project management, we have great relationships with the vendors, we have an incredible network. All those things help us to allow a company, most importantly, to stabilize their system, to put it in a place to be able to optimize it and use it as a transformational tool so that they can get a return on the investment of it. Because the vast majority of organizations, when asked, are not getting a return on that HR tech investment. And the vast majority of the customers that we are providing our full service to are getting that. And we're super proud of it.
Yeah. And I think the bigger thing here is that you're aligning with the business strategies. I think sometimes there's maybe again, we go back to that word clarity, the decisions on what the direction is for the business, and to be able to come in and unpack that a little bit more and draw some clarity is going to be really, really important. All right, so let's switch gears. Let's talk about HR like a boss. What sparked the idea for the book? I know that you speak, and you're very engaged in getting out the word, but talk to me a little bit about the book and give our listeners an idea of really what sparked this.
Thank you for asking. The personal reason is I unfortunately went through a hardship, having lost both of my parents in a short period of time, right around COVID happening. And I felt this inspiration. I was not inspired to go buy a convertible car or jet black my hair, midlife crisis type of situation. I decided to write, which went against just my general like of writing and reading. I was not much of a writer, or I wasn't much into books. It's kind of an ironic decision for me. But I love the experience for the reasons I mentioned earlier on the show. I didn't realize how many bad ideas I had and how many occasional okay ideas that I had. And by writing them down and reading them back, it really made those ideas stand out one way or the other. And then the real business reason why is that human resource professionals are really good human beings. I've gotten to know thousands of them over the years, literally thousands of them. And they're good-natured. They're well-intended. They're like corporate social workers in many regards because of the work that they do, but they're under-resourced. They're oftentimes undermanned. They lack some of the experience that's needed of someone to meet the expectations that their executives have. And that, combined with the fact of how much the data has suggested that people in general, the general population, do not like work. They're disengaged at work. I thought human resources had the best chance to transform how people feel at work by doing HR in an amazingly awesome way and drive improved employee engagement levels, drive the reason why you're working and creating meaning behind it. If we can do that well, and then if we can inform and educate our HR professionals to be better business leaders, understand the business aspects, understand the profitability of an organization, be able to talk in those corporate executive terms. If we can do those two things, improve engagement with employees, bring them meaning in what they do, drive profitability, then I really feel like there's been a big push. And when I started writing the book, it had just kind of formed this social responsibility of corporate America. And I think that when you can do that, work oftentimes nowadays is like church for people. It's part of their community. It's a big identification of who they are. They spend an inordinate amount of time doing it, and they want to feel good about it. And in most cases, they don't. Imagine if you work at an employer where you know what your job is, you have engaged leadership, you understand your role, and you're good at it. There's profitability inside that company, and they treat the environment and the organization and your community well by giving back to it, whether it's by attacking a societal issue like education or homelessness, or you bring up the topic. All of a sudden, that employee's feeling like at work, I'm making a difference, and I can do something as a result of my high quality work. I'm making a difference in our community. And the last thing I'll share with you on that, David, is it's interesting to me when I talk to people and I introduce myself to them or vice versa, it's always name, where you're from, and what you do. What you do is in the category of importance to you is probably the third most important thing that you do. And you spend a third of your life working.
Doing it.
And we need to be engaged. Other than a CEO, I think human resources has the greatest chance to transform how people feel at work. And that was really the inspiration from a functional work perspective on why I wrote the book.
Yeah. And you talk about emphasizing the idea of HR professionals becoming more skilled business leaders. And this kind of overlays what you've just been talking about here. What does that transformation look like in practice? I mean, it's something that doesn't happen overnight. And what are some things that they could, HR professionals can hang their hat on, or maybe even simple things right now that they could implement immediately just to start making that wheel, get that wheel moving and change to become stronger?
All right, 74,000 words in a manuscript in 90 seconds. Here's how you do it. High degree of emotional intelligence. You have to take a significant amount of ownership of what you do in your job. You have to have passion and you have to love it. You have to improve your level of communication. Communication is probably the most important skill that we as business professionals have. The most successful people have it. The least successful people probably struggle with it, quite frankly. You have to not be afraid, and you must be willing to build relationships. I have a lot of HR professionals say, I'm afraid to build a relationship with David because I might need to fire him. Well, my guess is if you have a good relationship with David and you have to fire him, that's going to go better than him not knowing you at all.
Yes.
Communication, relationships, emotional intelligence, love, and ownership. And then the last thing I'll share is that you have to have a plan. You have to have a plan on how do I become a better business leader? What strategic decisions do I need to make? What tactical decisions do I need to make? What learning and development skills do I need to develop? And if you do that, we have a 5 simple principled business strategy inside of HR Like a Boss, chapter 14, which is the money chapter. I've been told that business strategy is based on purpose, people, process, productivity, and profit. And if you build your business of human resources around those 5 pillars, and you do it with ownership and you do it with love, my guess is you're going to be a drastically better HR professional than what most people have experienced.
Preach, brother. I mean,
did I get it in 90 seconds? I didn't count it, but I tried.
He knew his stuff. Like this is exactly what people need to hear, John. And I know you're putting the word out and you're speaking, and I know that you obviously have the book. It's important to you, and the passion comes through with exactly everything you're talking about because you've lived this. And I just think it's fantastic. You know, when you're writing that book, right? Because I'm in the middle of writing. I'm not even in the middle. I'm coming towards the end of writing my first book. And when you're unpacking some of this stuff, like you said, there are things in there where you're like, you think that's a great idea, and you're like, oh, maybe it's not a great idea. But did writing the book change the way you approach things? Did you pull some things out as you were writing the book, maybe that changed your approach with your own business or even client relationships when you were going through that process?
2 things I would say to answer your question. Well, before I get into that, congratulations, and I look forward to whatever the finished product is and buying it and supporting it. It's a huge accomplishment. Having done it, it may be more difficult than starting a business. It's like birthing another child or organization. There's something to be said about it, but
it is tough.
I think a couple things happened to me when I wrote the book. Number one, I had to practice what we preached. I couldn't write a book and not deliver on the things that we talked about. So communication, I've studied emotional intelligence so much over the last 5 years. I can't even tell you. We've implemented the business strategy that I mentioned to you before. And that we're not doing everything that I wrote about in the book. I'm not going to sit here and say like to a T that's all been done. But we've practiced to the best of our ability what we're preaching. The second thing I will say is that it made me a better communicator because I was clear on my ideas and thoughts. I would think about myself as a presenter and a communicator before when I hadn't written versus now. It just makes things resonate more in my mind. Yeah. When you write it down, here's the thing, and maybe your experience is now, David, if somebody had told me the occupational hazard of writing a book is reading back your own work about 7 times, do the math on 7 times 74,000 words. That's a lot. I never read more books than HR Like a Boss in my life, to be honest with you. And it became nauseating at some point, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm kind of tired of myself, my own words. But because we wanted to get it right and we wanted to be high quality, you ended up believing or hearing, or it resonated with you. So when I went and did my first HR Like a Boss presentation, I had practiced it like I normally did, but it just came out just so much smoother, so much clearer, so much articulated. And then eventually what I got told by a number of people is that you're a great storyteller. And I think to myself, well, I wasn't before. How did I become that? Well, because I practiced and I wrote down the stories that I had in my mind onto a piece of paper. I read them back. And then for some form or fashion, that resonated with me and stuck. And I would say that's those 2 things, just the clarity of your own thoughts and also just kind of shedding yourself of these ideas, some wonderful, some terrible.
Yeah.
It declutters your brain in a way that you can't even realize. And that's why journaling, even if you don't want to write a manuscript and that's too intimidating to people, just journal, or even just on your phone, get your notes out and just write. Like if you have an idea when you're driving down the road, don't do it while you're driving, but you're in a stop sign, type out your idea, and then then maybe you'll come back to it. Maybe you won't.
Yeah. You answered that so well, and going through the experience right now, it just offered this clarity for me. Like there were things that I had and I've done sales workshops and kickoff events and all that good stuff, but it really offered some clarity I have great processes, don't get me wrong. And again, I'm not patting myself on the back, but just through the experience of years, not trying to impress anybody, just impress upon people that when you have a process and you really write it out, you almost fine tune everything. And then it translates over, like you said, John, into your communication. The first time I ever spoke in front of a group, I probably said 5 words and I had like sweat in the back of my neck, and I just totally fumbled this thing. I mean, now I can speak in front of 500 people and it doesn't bother me, but when you have that practice, like you said, and also the clarity, and then you write it, you get the better communication. It's just, it's really great to hear that, because I feel that the way that you just said. So
there's really no downside to it other than the fact that it takes time.
Yeah, it does.
And it's an investment in yourself and in your development. And I get why people, they look at it and say, wow, you wrote a book. Like now that I've done it, I realize that it's a significant level of effort.
Yeah.
And it is also, it's career defining. It'll change you as a business leader, David. I will tell you that as having experienced it myself. And it's kind of funny. I used to do presentations and now I do keynote speaking. And what's the difference? Well, I wrote a book. That's really the only difference between John from 5 years ago and John to today. And I get paid for doing it, which is also unique. And I'm not saying that, again, to your point, to impress anyone, but to impress upon the idea that by going through that exercise, you can create some substantiation for yourself. And people look at you differently. There's no doubt about it. There's HR Like a Boss fans, which is like really weird. You go to a conference and they're like waiting for you at the vendor booth. Like, oh my gosh, this is weird. I love you. I think, I don't know, like don't be creepy, but it's definitely a thing. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about it to do it. And when I do, or I run into people because they know I wrote a book, I cannot encourage people enough to do. As a matter of fact, David, I'm working on 3 manuscripts right now that I'm simultaneously writing, because that's how my silly brain works sometimes. But we're going to have a pair out for HR Like a Boss. Payroll Like a Boss is coming out in May of 2026. That'll be the first manuscript. And then I'm working on a memoir that I have for a very important person in my life. And then there's a book, a culmination book that I'm going to write based upon purpose that I'd love to come out in 2027. That's like my passion project. I hope that has transformational impact, because HR is very HR centric. And one of the best compliments I've gotten about my book is I'll have friends read it just because they care for me. And they'll be like, thank God, John. I'm like, what do you mean? It's not a book about HR. It's a book about practical business that you make relatable. And that's the greatest compliment I can get. But I want to write a book that's got more, I'll call it holistic, general population applicableness. And that book's called Purpose is Paramount. And I'm about halfway done with that, but focused on Payroll Like a Boss to get that manuscript done. But it's addictive, and it's been life-changing for me in such a wonderful way. I wouldn't be on this show for crying out loud if I didn't write that book.
Yeah, congratulations, man. Really. I mean, it is, to put that out there. I know what a effort it is to being kind of at the tail end of this. I've got about two or 3 more chapters to go. And, but it's been an experience, and sometimes it comes real easy. And then other days it's like, oh man, this is not like, it's like dragging it out of me a little bit, but it's been an experience.
My mom was an artist. She painted the painting behind me, David. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
But you reminded me of her telling me one day she was in an artist painting slump. And me being the novice, naive son that hadn't really created any art before, I'm like, just go out and paint, Mom. And she got really mad at me. Like, you can't do that, John. It's not how it works. And to your point, like sometimes you can write and you can create art, and other times it's like work. And my guess is those days where it's like work, that content probably isn't as good when it just free flows out of you. And I would watch yourself as you go through that time frame for yourself as you try to finish those next 2 to 3 chapters to find the times where it feels like organic, natural content creation versus work, because the quality is probably noticeable.
Yeah. And it's been more often than not. It's been just flows, but then there's some times where I want to get through it. I want to push through it, and some good stuff's come out of that. And then, that's my next venture, like you, is getting into the speaking, and I'm not there yet, but that's going to be my next venture, is getting into the speaking events like you and doing that stuff. All right, man, listen, we're going to close it up here. Let me ask you one more question. What's next for you? What's on the docket? Any projects? I know you got speaking engagements. What's happening with you, and where can people get a hold of you?
No, I really appreciate you asking. Couple important things. I'm working on that content and manuscripts, which is really cool. I'm also inside of my business at Willory, trying to do my best to empower all my team members and my executive leadership team so that I'm not as an important part of the business. I know a lot of the listeners that are here are CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs. And I think the greatest compliment of any business owner is 2:00 on a Thursday afternoon. They're at the golf course and someone asks them, "Hey, aren't you supposed to be in the office?" And they're like, "No, I'm not needed." And I revel in that possibility, and I'm doing the best that I can to create the environment to do so. That's a big exercise, kind of a 5-year project in my mind. And then just speaking gigs, I am so fortunate. I wish you the best of luck in any way that I can support you. Getting the chance to command a stage and share a story is one of the greatest compliments I can get. I'm going to a number of national conferences, but probably the most unique thing that's happening the first week in October for 10 days. So basically from the 14th to the 4th to the 14th, I'll be in 6 cities doing opening keynotes or some sort of presentation at an HR related conference. I'll be flying all over the country, Maryland, Georgia, Dallas, Texas, a number of other spots along the way. And I've told my family about this, and they scratch their head like, "Why in the world do you want to do that?" And it's because I truly love it. I absolutely believe in it. And there is a gap that exists between what I think workers and employees need from human resource professionals. I'm trying to inspire and change some of that. But at the end of the day, you can find me easiest at my email, john@willory.com. That's JOHN@WILLORY.com. Or you can learn more about the HR Like a Boss movement at hrlikeaboss.com.
Great stuff, man. Great stuff. I can't thank you enough for being here, man. It's been a great conversation. We did pack it in 46 minutes. We packed in a lot of information. I know it's valuable to our listeners out there. And I want to thank everybody for listening to the show. Again, just share this show, like this show, share it with one person. I know there's somebody out there that you can share this with that's going to benefit from it. And John, again, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Everybody, wealth, health, success to all of you out there. Go get a win today, and we will see you next time. Thanks again, John.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Sliman.